Hi, my name is Lena. I'm 27 years old, and I never imagined that on the day of my wedding, I'd be bleeding on the floor while the people who raised me stood and watched like I was nothing. I was never the favorite child. My mother, Rebecca, made that clear from the moment my younger sister Mira was born. Mira was everything I wasn't: loud, proud, obsessed with labels and parties, and always chasing men with money. And she had a knack for knowing exactly how to stay in our parents' good books. I, on the other hand, loved simpler things. I worked at a small but charming art gallery downtown. I loved books more than bags, meaningful conversations more than attention-seeking gossip. And that made me the disappointment of the family. My mother used to say it directly. You'll end up alone in some dusty studio with paint under your nails while your sister will be sipping champagne on a yacht. And I believed her for a while. Until I met Stephen. He was soft-spoken, a little quiet, dressed in the plain black uniform of the cafe down the street. The first time we talked, I noticed his eyes, calm, curious, intelligent. Not the kind of man who talked to impress, but one who listened. He was working as a waiter, or so he told me. And, to be honest, that didn't matter to me. What mattered was how he treated me, like I was someone worth listening to, someone worth being proud of. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. But deep down, I was terrified of what my family would say. Because in their world, love wasn't enough, money was. They believed a man should come with a portfolio, not a paycheck. A family name, not a first name. And the man I loved served coffee and cleaned tables. Still, when Stephen proposed, I said yes. I chose love. I chose him. Even if it meant standing against my own blood. But what I didn't know was that the worst betrayal of my life wasn't behind me. It was waiting at the very altar where I stood in white. Because on that day, my parents didn't just try to ruin my wedding, they tried to ruin me. And that's where my story begins. It was a chilly Wednesday afternoon when I first met Stephen. I had just left the gallery early after a canceled appointment and stopped by the cozy little cafe on 4th Street, a place I usually passed without noticing. That day, something pulled me in. I sat by the window, sketchbook in hand, watching people hustle through the fog outside. I ordered a hot coffee, and a few minutes later, he brought it to my table. "Here you go," he said with a polite smile. "Let me know if you need anything else." I looked up. He was handsome, but not flashy. His smile was sincere, not the forced one I saw from most guys trying to flirt. He wasn't trying to impress me. And that intrigued me. "Thank you," I replied, watching him walk away. 15 minutes later, he was back, holding another coffee. "Someone ordered this by mistake and didn't want it. Thought you might like a refill on the house." I laughed softly. Is that a clever move or just really good customer service? "Maybe both," he said, grinning. "I'm Stephen." "Lena," I said, shaking his hand. "Nice to meet you." From that moment on, I found myself coming back more often. Not because the coffee was particularly amazing, but because Stephen was. Over time, we started having long conversations between his shifts. He had a quiet wisdom, a sense of peace about him that made you feel grounded just by sitting near him. He spoke about people, about moments he observed, an old couple that held hands, a lonely businessman who always ordered the same pastry but never smiled. He saw people deeply, and I admired that. I told him about art, the gallery, and the strange silence of paintings that say more than words. One rainy evening, we sat together on a bench outside the cafe after closing. The wind whipped through the trees, and I shivered. He gently put his coat around my shoulders. "You know," he said, "I really like spending time with you." I looked at him. "Even if I'm not sipping champagne on a yacht?" He chuckled. "Especially because you're not." And that was the moment I fell for him. There were no roses, no grand gestures, just two souls in the rain, sharing silence like it meant something. A few months later, he took me to a little rooftop garden and proposed. No ring, no spotlight, just Stephen, a hand-carved wooden box, and a quiet, trembling, "Will you marry me?" And I said yes, without hesitation. Because even if he was a waiter with nothing but kindness to offer, I would still choose him. But I knew my family wouldn't. When I told my family about the engagement, The silence was deafening. We were sitting in the living room of my parents' house, a place I had learned to walk through carefully, like navigating a minefield made of words. My mother, Rebecca, sat stiffly on the couch, wine glass in hand. My father, Oscar, pretended to flip through the TV channels, though the television wasn't even on. My sister, Mira, sat smugly by the fireplace, already sensing drama. "I'm getting married," I said, holding my breath. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "To whom?" "That gallery owner you mentioned once." "No," I said softly. "To Stephen." Mira blinked, confused for a moment, and then her expression cracked into an amused grin. "Wait, Stephen? As in, the waiter from that cafe you always go to?" I nodded. "Yes, that's Stephen." Rebecca snorted. "Are you serious, Lena? You want to marry a man who takes orders for a living?" "He's more than that," I replied firmly. "He's kind, intelligent, thoughtful." "Poor," Mira interrupted, sipping her imported juice. "You forgot poor." I clenched my fists. "He treats me with more respect than anyone ever has. That matters more than any bank account." Oscar finally turned toward me. "Does he even have a proper job? Benefits? Savings?" I swallowed hard. "We're managing just fine. And I'm not asking for your approval. I'm telling you." Rebecca stood up, pacing dramatically. "Lena, your sister married a CEO. They just bought a house in the hills. You're throwing your future away for a man who can't even pay for his own wedding." Mira chimed in with a smirk. "Maybe we should have the reception at his cafe. We could all bring our own mugs." The room burst into laughter, except mine. I stood up, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. "I didn't expect your blessings. I knew what I'd get. But I won't let your arrogance dictate my happiness. I'm marrying him, and nothing you say will change that." I turned and walked out of that house with my head high. Stephen and I planned a small, private wedding with a few close friends, a garden venue outside the city, and nothing fancy, just peace. Still, a part of me wondered if my family would actually show up. I never imagined they'd do worse than stay away. I never imagined they'd come just to destroy it. The morning of our wedding was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes just before a storm, but you pretend it's peace. The venue was perfect, a private garden on the edge of town. Ivy climbed the wooden arches, white chairs lined the green lawn, and soft music drifted through the autumn air. The scent of wildflowers mixed with the fresh earth, and for a moment, I felt like nothing could ruin this. Stephen stood by the altar in a crisp black suit, looking at me like I was the only person in the universe. His friends, warm, humble, respectful, smiled at me as I walked down the aisle. They knew me. They accepted me. They were here for us. Then I saw them. My parents, Rebecca in a deep red designer dress that screamed status, standing tall with her signature cold expression. My father, Oscar, stone-faced beside her. Mira, dressed like she was attending a celebrity gala, barely hiding her eye rolls as she took her seat beside Peter, her CEO husband, who looked thoroughly unimpressed with the modest setup. I didn't let it shake me. When I reached Stephen, he gently squeezed my hand. His eyes were calm, unwavering. "You're everything," he whispered. "Let's do this." And we did. We exchanged vows beneath the golden sun, promising love, patience, and truth. I looked into his eyes and saw home. When he placed the ring on my finger, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization that I had finally chosen myself. As the ceremony ended, soft applause rippled through the garden. Stephen's friends hugged us. I saw tears in their eyes. My parents barely clapped. Mira was already texting someone. Still, I told myself, they came. That must mean something. A white tent was set up nearby for a light reception. Tables were decorated with candles and homemade floral centerpieces. A small playlist played in the background. No live band, no champagne towers, just warmth. Stephen and I sat together at the head table. I could feel the unease from my family's side, like they were holding their breath, waiting for something to criticize. I was wrong to think the worst was behind me, because the real storm, the one that would leave blood, betrayal, and brokenness in its wake, was just about to begin. And it would start with a watch. The sun was beginning to dip, casting golden shadows across the garden tent. Laughter hummed from Stephen's side of the guests. His friends raised toasts, shared funny stories, and filled the air with genuine celebration. On my family's side, silence, tension, occasional forced smiles. Still, I try to stay present, holding Stephen's hand beneath the table, whispering thank yous to well-wishers, ignoring the cold glances from across the aisle. Then it happened. The host tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now hear a few words from the mother of the bride, Mrs. Rebecca." I froze. Stephen gently squeezed my hand, as if asking, "Are you ready for this?" I nodded, unsure. Rebecca rose with her wine glass and slow steps. Her heels echoed on the wooden floor. She reached the mic, brushed her perfectly styled hair back, and smiled stiffly. "Today," she began, "my daughter Lena begins a new chapter. She's always been different, sensitive, artistic." Her tone shifted. She never cared much for appearances or ambition. While her sister Mira followed a practical path, a real career, a real man, Lena chose to follow her heart. There was a sharpness in her voice now. "I won't pretend this wedding was what I envisioned. But," she glanced toward Stephen, "love comes in all forms, even in cafes and under aprons." Guests shifted in their seats. Then she raised her glass and smiled wide. "To Lena and her waiter husband." The silence that followed was brutal. Before I could react, Mira added, "Let's just hope he serves more loyalty than lattes." A few of Myra's friends chuckled. My breath caught in my throat. But Rebecca wasn't done. She turned toward Peter, Myra's husband, and gasped, "Peter, where's your watch?" Peter looked down at his wrist. "My Rolex that's gone." "Gone," Rebecca repeated dramatically. "It was right there before dinner." My heart dropped. She turned slowly to the crowd. "That watch is worth $12,000. I hope someone didn't get too excited about joining the family and take something that didn't belong to them." Then she looked directly at Stephen. Stephen blinked.
Calmly.
No expression. "That's enough," I said, standing up. Rebecca raised a hand.
"No.
"This is serious. I saw him near Peter's table earlier. Didn't you, Mira?" Mira played along smoothly.
Yeah."
"He was getting drinks." "That's his job, isn't it?" Rebecca said sweetly. "Oh, wait, that's not even his job anymore. Now he's family." Guests started murmuring. Some looked at Stephen.
Some looked at me.
All eyes felt like knives. "I can't believe this," I said, my voice shaking. "You planned this." Oscar stood now too, his jaw clenched. "We didn't raise you to bring shame on this family, Lena." "She married a thief," Rebecca hissed. "She married a man," I shot back. "A better one than any of you could ever understand." But I shouldn't have said that. Because the next moment my father's face turned red with rage. And what he did next would change everything. The entire garden fell into stunned silence. The kind of silence that feels thick in your throat, the kind that presses against your chest like a warning. My father Oscar took a slow, threatening step forward. "You've humiliated us enough," he said through gritted teeth, his voice low and trembling with rage. "You brought shame to this family, and now you dare talk back?" Stephen stood beside me, protective but calm, reaching for my hand again. But Oscar wasn't looking at Stephen.
He was looking at me.
And then he moved. Just behind our table, leaning against a wooden post, was a baseball bat. One of the kids had left it there earlier in the day while playing near the reception lawn. At the time, it seemed innocent, harmless. Oscar picked it up with shaking hands. My heart stopped. "Dad, no." But before I could take another breath, before anyone could step in, he swung it. The bat came down with terrifying force and struck me hard on the side of my head.
Pain.
Instant, hot, white pain exploded across my skull. The world spun, blurred. I felt myself falling. The sound of gasps, screams, the shattering of a wine glass somewhere. All of it became a distant echo. I hit the ground. My knees folded. Blood poured down my temple. I couldn't feel my arm. My ears rang. Everything moved in slow motion after that. I heard Stephen's voice, but it felt far away. He was shouting, furious, shaking. "Are you out of your mind? She's bleeding. You hit your own daughter." I blinked, struggling to stay conscious. My vision was swimming. I saw guests frozen, some running, some crying. I saw Mira with her hand over her mouth, half shocked, half silent. But most of all, I saw Stephen kneeling beside me, holding me, his face pale with fear and fury. He turned his head and bellowed toward the crowd. "Call 911.
Now.
Then he pulled out his own phone. "You want to talk about theft? Lies? You want to accuse me? Fine. Let's talk. But first, let's get my wife to a hospital. And then, I'll show you who I really am." As I drifted toward unconsciousness, I heard the distant sound of sirens in the wind. I don't remember much of the ride, only the cold of the grass against my cheek, the pressure of a towel on my head, Stephen's arms never letting go. When I blinked awake again, the flashing lights had arrived. 2 police cruisers pulled up just outside the garden gate, followed by an ambulance. Uniformed officers and paramedics hurried toward us. Stephen stood tall now, one hand bloodied from holding the compress to my head, the other pointing toward my parents. "She was assaulted by her own father," he said coldly. "In front of witnesses. In front of everyone." Officer Randy, a broad-shouldered man with a calm voice, stepped between them. "Who struck the bride?" Oscar said nothing. Rebecca tried to intercept. "It was an accident," she said, stepping forward. She was being emotional. She was standing still. Stephen cut in. He picked up a baseball bat. He swung it. "I have it all on video. One of our friends was recording her thank you speech." Randy turned toward Oscar. "Sir, I need you to step aside." Then Stephen did something that silenced the rest of the garden. He walked to the front of the tent, where Rebecca, Mira, and Peter stood frozen. He picked up the microphone, the same one my mother had used earlier to belittle me. His voice was steady, commanding. "I wasn't going to say this today, but since you've all accused me, insulted me, and now attacked the woman I love, let me give you some truth." The entire reception went dead quiet. Even the police paused. "My name is Stephen Hale. I own Hale Developments, one of the top luxury real estate firms in this state. I've developed 15 residential and commercial properties across the city, including the tower Peter's company just rented their new office in." Peter's face turned a shade paler. "I have no criminal record. I've employed over 400 people in this city. And yes, I worked as a waiter. Because I wanted someone who saw me as a person, not a price tag." He looked directly at Rebecca. "Lena loved me when she thought I had nothing. And that's exactly why she's the only person I've ever trusted with everything." He turned back to Officer Randy. "Now, I'd like to press charges against her parents. And her sister. Because what they did today wasn't just cruel, it was criminal." Gasps filled the air. The officers stepped forward. Oscar, Rebecca, and Mira were each placed under arrest. Handcuffed.
Read their rights.
Mira struggled. "This is insane. You're ruining our lives." Stephen didn't even flinch.
No.
"You did that yourselves." As paramedics lifted me onto the stretcher, Stephen walked beside them, holding my hand, never once letting go. The ambulance door shut. I looked at him through blurred vision. "You told them everything?" He nodded softly. "No more lies." I closed my eyes as the sirens wailed. For the first time all day, I finally felt safe. The ambulance ride was a blur. I drifted in and out of sleep, feeling Stephen's hand wrapped tightly around mine the whole time. The paramedic, a kind man named Dr. Tyler, checked my vitals, gently wrapped my head, and reassured me that the injury wasn't life-threatening. "You're lucky," he said with a soft smile. "The swelling is minimal. You'll be sore for a while, but you'll recover fully." Lucky. Funny how that word sounded so strange after everything that happened. At the hospital, they ran a scan, cleaned the wound, gave me something for the pain, and kept me under observation for a few hours. Stephen stayed by my side the entire time. Not once did he leave the room. He didn't try to comfort me with empty words. He just sat there, silently holding my hand. And somehow that was enough. Around midnight, Dr. Tyler returned with paperwork. "You're stable. We're going to discharge you," he said. "But I recommend you rest. No stress, no chaos." I almost laughed. No chaos? Too late for that. Stephen helped me into his car, wrapping a soft blanket over me. I assumed we were heading back to the tiny apartment I had seen before, the one with the squeaky floors and second-hand couch.
But we didn't go that way.
We drove through a part of the city I rarely visited. Elegant neighborhoods, private gates, homes that looked like they belonged in magazines. "Stephen," I whispered, confused. "Where are we going?" He didn't answer, just smiled gently and drove a little further up a curved road until we reached an enormous black iron gate. It opened silently at his voice command. I sat up, stunned. Beyond the gate was a mansion. Not just big, breathtaking. Glass walls, warm lights glowing from inside, a long stone pathway, and a fountain in the center of the driveway. I blinked. "Whose house is this?" Stephen parked and looked at me with calm eyes. "Mine." I stared at him. "What?" He nodded, unbuckling my seatbelt. "This is where I live. This is my actual home." I looked out the window again, still in disbelief. "But why didn't you ever show me this?" He helped me out of the car and gently led me toward the front door. "Because I wanted to know," he said, "if you loved me. Not the house. Not the cars. Just me." He stopped at the entrance, turned to face me fully. "And you did, even when you thought I had nothing. That's why I fell in love with you." Tears welled up in my eyes. The pain in my head faded behind the quiet joy in my chest. I reached for his hand. "I still do," I whispered. "And I always will." Inside, the house was warm, full of soft lights, art pieces, and a scent of fresh linen and lavender. He showed me to a guest bedroom that looked nicer than any hotel I'd ever seen. As I curled under the covers, he knelt beside the bed and kissed my hand. "Sleep, Lena. Tomorrow we make things right." And for the first time since the wedding, I closed my eyes and truly rested. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Stephen's mansion, casting soft gold across the marble floors. I woke slowly, the pain in my head dull but tolerable. What remained sharper was the ache in my heart and the clarity in my mind. Stephen brought me breakfast in bed. Warm tea, toast, and fresh fruit. I could see the concern in his eyes, but I could also see his strength. "I spoke with a lawyer this morning," he said gently. "We have every right to press full charges." I nodded slowly. "We need to. Not just for me, but because they need to understand they can't hurt people like that and walk away." He leaned forward. "We'll do it together." Within days, our case moved forward. With police video, witness statements, the event recording, and even the hospital report from Dr. Tyler, the evidence was undeniable. Oscar, my father, was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Rebecca, my mother, was charged with false accusation, public defamation, and conspiracy. Mira, my sister, was charged as an accomplice to character assassination and malicious intent. Their lawyer tried to twist the facts, claimed it was a misunderstanding, claimed my father lost control, claimed my mother was just joking. But the judge wasn't moved, nor were the jurors. When the footage was played, the swing of the baseball bat, my collapse, the panic that followed, the courtroom fell completely still. Stephen and I sat side by side through every hearing. He held my hand as I testified, and I held his when the verdict was read. For the crime of physical assault with intent to cause harm, the court finds Oscar guilty. He is sentenced to 6 years in prison without early parole. For the act of public false accusation and emotional harm, the court finds Rebecca guilty. She is sentenced to 2 years in prison, plus mandatory psychological counseling. For the role in planning and supporting malicious defamation, Mira is sentenced to 1 year, with an additional 250 hours of community service. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. After so many years of being belittled, dismissed and compared. After being hit, humiliated, and shamed on my wedding day, I finally had one thing they never gave me: justice. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Questions swirled. We said nothing. Stephen wrapped his arm around my shoulders and whispered, "Now we close this chapter." I looked up at him. "What now?" I asked softly. He smiled. "Now we live." A week after the final court hearing, Stephen took me to the balcony of our bedroom, overlooking the private garden behind his estate. The air was fresh, the sky open. Everything felt lighter, like the past had been washed away and replaced with peace. "I booked something," he said one morning, holding 2 passports and a folded itinerary. I raised an eyebrow. "Something?" He smiled. "Just us. No drama. No noise. No lies. Just a quiet cabin, and views that will make you forget everything." I opened the folder. Round-trip tickets to Switzerland. I stared at him in disbelief. "You planned a honeymoon?" He shrugged. "You've been through hell. You deserve a little heaven." 3 days later, we landed in Geneva and were driven up winding roads to a secluded mountain lodge. Snow fell gently outside the wide glass windows. The fireplace crackled beside our bed. The world felt quiet again, and for once, we could breathe without the weight of judgment. One night, as we sat wrapped in thick blankets, sipping hot chocolate and watching snowflakes melt against the window pane, I turned to him and asked, "If you could go back, would you still hide who you were?" Stephen looked thoughtful for a moment, then nodded.
Yes.
"Because I would have still met you, the woman who defended me, loved me, and stood up to everyone. Not because I was rich, but because I was worth it." I rested my head against his shoulder. "We built something stronger than blood ties, didn't we?" He kissed the top of my head. "We built truth." There, high above the chaos of the world we had left behind, we laughed freely, dreamed wildly, and began planning our new future. We returned home weeks later, stronger, healed, and full of purpose. And although my family was nowhere in sight, I no longer felt empty, because the man beside me, the love we had built, and the peace we had earned, they were enough. And maybe, just maybe, that painful wedding day wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Make sure to subscribe for more powerful and emotional stories every week. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.